Welcome. Today we are undertaking a really immense analytical exploration.
We are.
The subject is the United States. And it's a nation of, well, contradictions of massive scale and a history that seems to consistently juxtapose these revolutionary ideals of liberty with some deeply entrenched systems of profound injustice.
It truly is. It's maybe the single most complex entity one can even attempt to synthesize in a focused discussion like this.
Yeah.
The source material we're working from it's encyclopedic. I mean, it spans 12,000 years of pre-Columbian history. It has detailed contemporary political analysis, and it even goes up to 2025 financial forecasts.
So our mission then is clarity. We want to conduct a really thorough examination of all this dense material, filtering out what is just noise and pulling out the most essential information.
Exactly.
The goal for you listening is a shortcut to being well-informed about the complex structure and the foundational history that define the modern American reality. We're looking for those pivot points, the surprising statistics that genuinely characterize the nation today.
And organization is absolutely paramount here.
It has to be.
Because the information just jumps across millennia. You've got geography, economics, government, culture, all mixed together. So we'll start by grounding ourselves in the foundations of American identity and its earliest, often turbulent history.
Okay.
Then we'll trace its explosive territorial growth, leading into its role as a global superpower, before we finish with the specific data on its geography, demographics, that colossal economy, its unique political system, and of course, its worldwide cultural footprint.
All right, let's unpack this. Starting with the very foundation, its name, the United States of America.
It feels like a phrase that must have been, ratified right at the moment of independence, but the sources actually pinpoint a much earlier, slightly surprising use.
They do. We can trace the phrase United States of America back to a letter from January 2, 1776.
So that's before the Declaration of Independence, months before. The letter was written by Stephen Moylan, an aide to General George Washington, and he was writing to Joseph Reed. The context is really important here. Moylan was trying to secure foreign assistance from Spain for the Revolutionary War effort.
So the idea, the name of a unified entity, was already being used by the Continental Army's command.
Precisely. The concept was already in use, right as independence was being formulated. And then, of course, it moves very quickly to formal adoption.
With Thomas Jefferson.
Yes. Thomas Jefferson solidifies the usage in a rough draft of the Declaration of Independence sometime after June 11, 1776. It shows just how quickly the colonies adopted that language of unification.
And the name America itself, that has an even longer history.
A much longer one. It comes from the Latinized name of the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci, Americus Vespucius. German cartographers were actually the first to apply this name to the landmass.
And when was that?
Way back in 1507.
So the geographical name predates the political entity by over 250 years. I also saw a detail in the sources about modern formal usage. It seems to speak to the government's focus on legal clarity.
That would be the U.S. government's own GPO-style manual. It directs that the full name, United States, should be used in all formal documents, treaties, executive orders, legal citations.
And it also specifies its use as an adjective.
Right. It says United States should precede any non-governmental entity, so you get a name like the United States Steel Corporation. That persistence of deliberate formality really underscores the legal gravity with which the government refers to itself.
Okay, so moving from the name to the earliest people. The sources trace the first inhabitants back over 12,000 years, migrating from Siberia.
Right, likely across the Bering Land Bridge or maybe along the ancient Ice Age coastline. This established a really deep historical tapestry. The material identifies the earliest widespread indigenous culture as the Clovis culture, which emerged around 11,000 BC.
And over the millennia, these groups diversified into some highly complex societies.
Incredibly sophisticated societies. They developed advanced agricultural practices. The Mississippian culture is a key example in the Midwestern, Eastern, and Southern regions.
The population estimates before European contact, though, they seem to vary wildly. That must speak to the gaps in our historical data.
The range is just vast. The sources cite a range from about 500,000 people to nearly 10 million indigenous people inhabiting what is now the U.S. before Europeans arrived.
That's a huge margin of error.
It is. But what the data highlights is that the consequences of colonization were catastrophic, largely because of the Columbian exchange and the introduction of Old World diseases. In the immediate aftermath, there are estimates that up to 95% of some indigenous populations, especially in the Caribbean, perished from these new infectious diseases.
And European colonization itself wasn't a purely British endeavor, at least not at the very start.
No, Spain was the earliest major presence. They staked a claim with Spanish Florida in 1513. St. Augustine, founded in 1565, became the first permanent European town in the present-day continental U.S.
And France was involved too.
France followed, establishing settlements along the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Valley. But it was British colonization, starting with Virginia in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620, that ultimately provided the legal and political foundation for what would become the 13 colonies.
And these British colonies started establishing these really critical precedents for self-governance almost immediately.
Years before the Revolution, yes. Documents like the Mayflower Compact in Massachusetts and the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut are cited as being absolutely essential precedents for local representative self-governance and for constitutionalism.
Why did that develop so strongly, so early?
The sources emphasized that the sheer distance separating the colonies from the British Crown was instrumental. It fostered and entrenched this powerful sense of local autonomy, which in the end made the break for independence almost inevitable.
But if we look at the narrative provided, this story of liberty and self-governance is just tragically intertwined with the institutionalization of slavery. The sources paint a very grim picture.
The material is explicitly clear. It states that the enslavement of Africans was practiced in all 13 colonies by 1770.
All 13, not just the southern colonies.
In all of them.
Yeah.
Furthermore, enslaved labor was the dominant, absolutely indispensable labor source supporting that incredibly profitable, large-scale plantation economy that defined the South.
So this contradiction is baked in from the very beginning.
It is. The pursuit of universal philosophical liberty existing right alongside the systemic institutionalization of chattel slavery. It's presented as the fundamental tragic flaw woven into the nation's fabric from its inception.
Which moves us to that philosophical shift from being colonies to forming a republic. The initial friction with Britain, it was less about a full-blown revolution and more about traditional civil rights, correct?
That's right. The Revolutionary War from 1775 to 1783, it really began as a civil protest over things like taxation without representation, the denial of traditional English common law rights. But it quickly moved into a revolution driven by these big Enlightenment ideals of universal rights, natural law, and popular sovereignty.
And the Founding Fathers were drawing on specific philosophical traditions.
Very heavily. They drew on classical, Renaissance, and especially Enlightenment philosophies from thinkers like Locke and Montesquieu.
Before we get the permanent constitution, though, the U.S. operated under something else, the Articles of Confederation. What does the material highlight about that structure?
The Articles of Confederation, which were in effect from 1781 to 1789, they formalized a very decentralized government. The states retained significant power, and the central authority was intentionally weak.
And that created problems.
It created huge problems. The inability to levy taxes or regulate commerce effectively became apparent very quickly. This led directly to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 and the eventual ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1789, which established the Federal Republic built on that system of checks and balances.
The end of this foundational era is really marked by the actions of one person, George Washington, which established a vital unwritten rule of American governance.
His conduct set two critical precedents for democratic stability. First, when he resigned as commander-in-chief after the war, he established the supremacy of civilian authority over military power. That's huge.
And the second one is even more famous.
His refusal to seek a third term as president, despite immense popular support. This cemented the idea of rotational office and, most importantly, the peaceful transfer of power. The sources treat this latter precedent as utterly foundational to American democracy.
It is remarkable how quickly the nation moved from establishing that precedent of peaceful civilian transfer of power to, well, exercising enormous physical aggressiveness across the continent. This 19th century growth was defined by what the sources call manifest destiny.
And this era was characterized by just dizzying territorial acquisition. The single largest piece of that puzzle was the Louisiana Purchase of 1803 from France.
Which did what to the country's size?
It nearly doubled the existing territory of the U.S. overnight. Then came the cession of Florida by Spain in 1819. The nation annexed the Republic of Texas in 1845.
But the biggest transformation came from the Mexican-American War.
Absolutely. That war, from 1846 to 1848, concluded with the Mexican cession, which transferred these vast territories, including what would become New Mexico and California, to the United States.
This rapid expansion meant the frontier was constantly encroaching on existing Native American populations, which led to some truly tragic federal policies.
The displacement of native peoples is one of the darkest consequences of this expansion. The key legislation was the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which was championed by President Andrew Jackson.
And this policy led to the period known as the Trail of Tears.
From 1830 to 1850, the sources estimate that of the roughly 60,000 Native Americans who were forcibly displaced from east of the Mississippi River, a staggering 13,200 to 16,700 died during those forced marches.
From what?
From starvation, disease, and exposure.
And the violence just intensified further west, spurred on by the lure of mineral wealth.
Yes. The California Gold Rush of 1848-1849 triggered a massive, destabilizing influx of white settlers, and it immediately led to organized violence against indigenous communities. The material explicitly documents this period as the California genocide of native inhabitants, which lasted well into the mid-1870s.
The sources are specific about the nature of that violence.
Very specific. It included widespread abduction, sexual abuse of women, and the use of indigenous children as forced laborers. The economic motivation for removal became inextricably linked to just immense brutality.
So while the nation is expanding westward, that core moral and economic conflict, slavery, was intensifying back east, despite attempts at legislative balance like the Missouri Compromise of 1820.
The economic divide just became insurmountable. Northern states were beginning to prohibit slavery, driven by moral and industrial shifts. But the South's dependence on enslaved labor was actually strengthening.
Why was it getting stronger?
This reliance was cemented by the immense profitability of cotton cultivation, which was accelerated by inventions like Eli Whitney's cotton gin in 1793. It made the agricultural economies of the Southern elites critically dependent on maintaining and expanding chattel slavery.
And the sources detail a series of legislative flashpoints in the 1850s that amounted to a complete breakdown of any legal compromise.
These are crucial moments of failure. First, you have the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850.
Which was incredibly divisive.
Incredibly. It mandated that escaped refugees be returned to their Southern owners, even if they had successfully reached non-slave states. It essentially forced Northern compliance with the institution.
And after that?
Next, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 completely overturned the anti-slavery prohibitions established decades earlier by the Missouri Compromise. It allowed for popular sovereignty to decide the issue in new territories.
And the final judicial blow came from the Supreme Court itself.
The court's decision in the Dred Scott case in 1857 was catastrophic. It ruled that a slave brought into free territory had no standing to sue and, most damningly, declared the entire Missouri Compromise unconstitutional.
So what did that ruling really mean in practical terms?
It eliminated nearly all legal possibilities for the federal government to restrict the expansion of slavery and effectively accelerated the nation toward armed conflict.
This sequence of legal failures led directly to the formation of the Confederacy.
It did. In 1861, 11 slave states seceded to form the Confederate States of America, initiating the Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865. The resulting Union victory achieved reunification and led directly to the national abolition of slavery, which was then formalized in the subsequent Reconstruction Amendments.
The immediate post-war period, the Reconstruction era, was a brief but crucial moment when that foundation for a multiracial democracy was legally set.
The Reconstruction Amendments are the legal bedrock of American civil rights. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery nationally. The 14th guaranteed equal protection under the law for all persons, which fundamentally altered the relationship between citizens and the states. And the 15th prohibited discrimination based on race or previous servitude, especially regarding voting rights.
A radical moment, as the sources say.
It was a radical, albeit brief, moment of federal commitment to equality.
But the material indicates that this promise was swiftly and violently undermined. This is where that historical contradiction we keep seeing reasserts itself.
The reversal was systemic. The Compromise of 1877 is cited as the event that effectively ended Reconstruction by withdrawing federal troops and oversight from the South. This ushered in what historians often call the nadir of American race relations.
And the Supreme Court was involved in this reversal as well.
Yes. Supreme Court rulings, like Plessy v. Ferguson, systematically dismantled the enforcement mechanisms of the Reconstruction Amendments. This allowed for the legal entrenchment of Jim Crow laws, racial segregation, and discriminatory economic policies like redlining across the country.
At the same time, during this so-called Gilded Age, we saw this unparalleled economic expansion, driven by rapid industrialization and profound demographic shifts.
The economic engine was fueled by an unprecedented influx of people. 24.4 million European immigrants arrived between 1865 and 1917, providing the necessary industrial labor.
And there was a major internal migration happening as well.
Concurrently, the Great Migration saw millions of African Americans move from the rural, repressive South to urban centers in the North and West, which fundamentally changed urban demography. This combination of cheap labor and new technology allowed the U.S. economy to outstrip the combined output of England, France, and Germany.
That measurement, surpassing the combined output of the three primary European powers. That's a staggering illustration of American economic power. But such rapid, unregulated growth inevitably led to severe inequality.
The massive concentration of power was a defining feature. Tycoons consolidated immense wealth by forming powerful trusts and monopolies in foundational industries, railroads, petroleum, steel. This explosion of wealth inequality and the resulting poor social and labor conditions. It provided the fertile ground for organized labor, for socialist thought, and ultimately spurred the progressive era reforms.
Which were aimed at what exactly?
They were aimed specifically at curbing corporate power, ensuring public safety, and addressing social inequalities through federal regulation.
So moving into the 20th century, the U.S. definitively breaks with its historical isolationism. Its entry into World War I in 1917 was absolutely decisive in aiding the Allies.
That entry marked the U.S. as a major global military and financial actor. Domestically, post-WWI brought major social change, including the constitutional amendment granting women's suffrage in 1920.
But the subsequent decade was dominated by the Wall Street crash of 1929.
Which was the trigger for the Great Depression, the most severe global economic contraction of that era.
The federal response under Franklin D. Roosevelt was transformative. It fundamentally redefined the government's role in the economy.
Roosevelt enacted the New Deal, which was an exhaustive series of programs centered around three R's: reform, recovery, and relief. These were sweeping programs designed to stabilize the collapsed financial system, employ millions through public works projects, and institute financial reforms to prevent future collapses.
So the New Deal permanently expanded the federal government's role.
It did, both in the regulation of the economy and in providing a safety net for citizens.
World War II not only rescued the U.S. economy, but really cemented its status as an international power.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the U.S. focused on defeating the Axis powers. A pivotal moment of the war and of global history was the U.S. development and use of the first nuclear weapons, culminating in the Trinity test in 1945.
And the nation emerged from the war economically untouched.
Not just untouched, strengthened by war production. And it gained immense international influence, becoming one of the four policemen who designed the post-war global order.
The immediate follow-up to that was the Cold War, which globally restructured geopolitical reality around the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Right. The U.S. adopted the policy of containment, which was aimed at limiting Soviet political and military influence globally. This involved extensive military buildup, alliances like NATO, and, as the sources note, numerous regime change efforts globally to counter perceived communist expansion.
And the rivalry extended into science with the space race.
A major symbol of technological supremacy that saw the U.S. achieve the first crewed moon landing in 1969.
Domestically, though, the Cold War era also saw the federal government finally address the deep-seated institutional racism left over from the failure of Reconstruction.
The civil rights movement achieved monumental successes, driven by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., and that resulted in landmark legislation. Furthermore, President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society Plan enacted broad-reaching federal programs and laws specifically designed to counteract systemic poverty and the lingering effects of institutional racism.
And culturally, this was a period of huge shifts.
The counterculture movement brought its own shifts, liberalizing attitudes toward drug use and sexuality, and generating significant public pressure against the Vietnam War, which led to the end of military conscription in 1973.
We also see a major demographic shift in the workforce detailed in the sources for this period.
A really profound societal restructuring occurred as the roles of women in the economy changed. Starting in the 1970s, there was a significant rapid increase in female paid labor participation. By 1985, the majority of American women aged 16 and older were employed, and that fundamentally altered both the composition of the workforce and the national economic structure.
Then the collapse of the Soviet Union between 1989 and 1991 left the U.S. as the world's sole superpower, leading to this concept of the American century.
The 1990s seemed to confirm this position. They were characterized by the longest recorded economic expansion in U.S. history, and it was driven by rapid technological advances.
This is when the World Wide Web becomes commercialized.
Yes, and you also have the launch of massive scientific undertakings like the Human Genome Project. The technology and financial sector, with online stock trading like NASDAQ becoming common, really established the framework for modern digital dominance.
That era of unipolar certainty was, of course, violently interrupted by the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks.
That event triggered the ensuing War on Terror, which was characterized by massive military interventions and extended occupations in Afghanistan and Iraq.
And then domestically, the economy faced immense instability again.
With the 2007 housing bubble and subsequent global financial meltdown, which culminated in the Great Recession, this was the largest economic contraction since the Great Depression of the 1930s.
Let's dive into the political language the sources use to describe the most recent decade, because it is extremely pointed. The 2010s and 2020s are explicitly described as being marked by increased political polarization and democratic backsliding.
This is a critical observation, and the language is stark. The sources reference cross-national democracy measures that have actually downgraded the U.S. status. Organizations that measure democratic health globally are now ranking the country as slipping toward a mixed regime or illiberal democracy status.
What does that mean exactly?
It strongly suggests that the foundational democratic principles, established with such optimism in 1789, are now facing serious, systemic internal challenges.
And the culmination of that internal challenge was detailed in the source material with unambiguous language regarding the January 2021 Capitol attack.
Yes, the sources describe the attack as an attempted self-coup d'etat. This is a profound historical designation. It signifies that the action was aimed specifically at preventing the peaceful transfer of power, the very precedent established by George Washington at the nation's founding.
So this political turbulence is framed as the ultimate contemporary contrast to the stability the U.S. projected throughout the Cold War.
That's right. Now, let's transition from that historical narrative to the physical and demographic structure the nation operates within. The sheer physical scale of the U.S. really dictates its complexity. It is the world's third largest country by total area totaling almost 3.8 million square miles when you include coastal and territorial waters. It sits just behind Russia and Canada.
And that vast scale must account for the incredible geographic and climatic variety noted in the sources.
Absolutely. The geography is immense. On the East Coast, you have the coastal plain leading to the older, more eroded Appalachian Mountains. Central to the continent is the vast Mississippi River system, which is the world's fourth longest.
And that drains the entire interior of the continent.
It does. West of that is the immense, fertile expanse of the Great Plains, followed by the towering young Rocky Mountains, with many peaks exceeding 14,000 feet.
The sources mention a specific geological feature within the Rockies that is critical.
That would be the Yellowstone caldera. It's the massive supervolcano underlying Yellowstone National Park, either the largest volcanic feature on the continent, a reminder of the latent geological power of the West. Farther still are the arid climate zones, the Great Basin, the Chihuahuan, Sonoran, and Mojave deserts leading up to the Pacific coastal ranges.
And we have to account for Alaska and Hawaii, two regions that are geographically so distinct from the contiguous 48 states.
Right. Alaska boasts the highest peak in North America, Denali, at 20,310 feet, and is marked by active volcanoes and massive glaciers. Hawaii is a volcanic archipelago that is physiographically part of Oceania. This massive landmass incorporates almost all major climate types globally, from humid continental in the northeast to arid in the southwest and truly tropical in Hawaii and South Florida.
What stands out in the source material regarding weather is how the U.S. interacts with its climate zones.
The statistic is striking. The U.S. receives more high-impact extreme weather incidents than any other country globally.
More than any other country.
Yes. This reflects its size, its varied climate zones, and its susceptibility to powerful atmospheric phenomena, particularly hurricanes along the Gulf Coast, and the concentration of severe tornadoes in the central region known as Tornado Alley.
And the sources mention climate change is making this worse.
Significantly more frequent in the 21st century. Things like severe droughts in the Southwest, and triple the number of heat waves compared to the 1960s.
On the conservation side, the U.S. is identified as one of only 17 megadiverse countries.
Which means it hosts an exceptionally large number of endemic species. We are talking about 17,000 species of vascular plants in the contiguous U.S. and Alaska alone, plus another 1,800 in Hawaii. It's also important to note the ownership structure of this land. About 28% of the country's total area is publicly and federally managed, primarily concentrated across the less populated western states.
Okay, turning now to demographics. The sheer population size places the U.S. third globally.
The 2024 population estimate is over 340 million people. Interestingly, the material notes that the majority of Americans live in the suburbs of major metropolitan areas, reflecting a post-war urbanization and decentralization trend. The median age is 39.1 years, and the nation is characterized by extreme diversity, with 37 ancestry groups claiming over 1 million members.
What does the most recent detailed census data tell us about the racial and ethnic composition of that population?
The 2020 census data shows that white Americans, defined as those tracing ancestry to Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa, form 61.6% of the population. Hispanic or Latino Americans are the second largest and fastest growing group, making up 18.7%. Black Americans represent 12.4%, and Asian Americans account for 5.9%.
So a composition that reflects ongoing immigration.
Both recent and historical, which is constantly reshaping the national identity.
When discussing language, there's a recent development regarding the official status of English that clarifies a long-held de facto reality.
That's a key detail. While English has always been the de facto official language, historically, the U.S. Congress never designated a de jure official language for all federal branches. The sources point to a very recent formalization. Executive Order 14224 in 2025 formally declared English official at the federal level.
But not at the state level.
No. The sovereignty of the states means 19 states, and the District of Columbia still have no official language designated.
And Spanish remains the massive secondary language.
It is the undisputed second most common language, with 41.2 million speakers using it at home. Additionally, the U.S. is home to 169 Native American languages that are still spoken, with 20 of them only officially recognized within the state of Alaska.
Regarding religion, the First Amendment's guarantee of free exercise and its prohibition on establishing a religion has fostered tremendous religious diversity.
The U.S. is often described as one of the most religiously vibrant, wealthy nations. It hosts the world's largest Christian population, including the fourth largest Catholic population globally. However, the intensity of religious practice varies starkly by region. Evangelical Protestantism dominates the cultural landscape of the Southern Bible Belt.
While other regions are more secular.
Exactly. The sources indicate that areas like New England and the western United States tend to be significantly more secular. The specific concentration of Mormonism as the predominant religion in Utah is also highlighted.
Finally, let's look at health and education metrics, which provide a window into the societal challenges the nation faces despite its immense wealth. Starting with life expectancy.
Life expectancy in 2023 was 78.4 years, showing a small recent gain primarily due to decreases in mortality from COVID-19, heart disease, and cancer.
But the sources emphasize a longer, more troubling trend.
They do. U.S. life expectancy fell behind that of other wealthy industrialized countries, starting way back in 1998, and this health disadvantage gap has been steadily widening ever since, driven by systemic issues.
The sources outline specific, alarming public health issues that contribute to this decline.
The U.S. has the highest suicide rate among high-income countries, and 2/3 of American adults are classified as obese or overweight. But the single most striking structural detail is the healthcare system itself. The U.S. is the only developed country without a system of universal health care.
Yet it spends the most.
It outspends any other country globally, both per capita and as a percentage of GDP on healthcare, consistently achieving worse outcomes than its peer nations. This represents a major economic and social paradox.
Now, education tells a different story in terms of investment and achievement.
The material shows massive investment. The U.S. spends more per student than any other country globally, averaging $18,614 per public K-12 student during the 2020-2021 period.
And this high investment correlates with high achievement levels.
It does. 37.7% of Americans aged 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree, and 14.2% hold a graduate degree. And in terms of global academic recognition, the U.S. has produced the most Nobel Prize winners globally, with 411 awards, a staggering number that underscores its continued dominance in scientific research and higher education.
But if the U.S. spends more per student than any other country, but still faces middling public education results compared to some peers, how do the sources reconcile that disconnect? Is it purely resource allocation or a deeper structural issue of inequality?
The analysis suggests it's structural. While high spending supports top-tier universities and research, the education system is highly decentralized and locally funded. This means that massive spending disparities exist within the country.
I see.
The high national average masks severe inequalities between high-income suburban districts and low-income urban or rural districts, which are often compounded by the effects of past segregation policies like redlining. It ensures that resource advantages are heavily skewed toward the wealthy.
Now we enter the realm of truly immense figures. The U.S. economy has been the world's largest in nominal terms since about 1890. That's over a century of global economic dominance.
The sheer scale is difficult to grasp. The nominal gross domestic product, or GDP, is estimated to reach $30.616 trillion by 2025. This single national economy accounts for over a quarter of the entire nominal global economic output.
And that's nominal. What about when adjusted for purchasing power?
It ranks second globally when adjusted for purchasing power parity, which is that necessary adjustment for international cost of living differences to truly compare buying power. But its influence on global markets is unmatched.
And that economic clout anchors the global financial system.
The sources are unequivocal. New York City is the world's principal financial center, and the metropolitan area surrounding it constitutes the world's largest metropolitan economy. Both the New York Stock Exchange, the NYSE, and NASDAQ are the world's two largest stock exchanges.
And this all backs the U.S. dollar.
Exactly. The immense size and stability of the U.S. economy back the dollar, which is the world's foremost reserve currency, and is used as the de facto currency in several other nations.
We often think of the U.S. as primarily a service economy today, but the manufacturing sector still operates at a colossal scale.
It absolutely remains a major industrial power. The U.S. manufacturing sector holds the world's second largest value output, trailing only China. However, the core driver of its strength is its role as the world's largest consumer market. Personal consumption expenditures exceeded $18.5 trillion in 2023. This consumer-driven model is really distinct from the export-driven models of many of its competitors.
The wealth figures are astonishing, yet they immediately bring us back to that central contradiction we've been tracing since the colonial era.
We see dual extremes. On the positive side, Americans enjoy the highest average household disposable income among members of the OECD, which is the club of high-income democracies. The U.S. also leads globally in the number of dollar billionaires, 735 in 2023, and millionaires, nearly 22 million. It is statistically the wealthiest country on earth.
That's amazing wealth. But how does that square with the founding ethos of equality? What do the sources say about how this wealth is distributed?
The sources show a stark reality of profound inequality. The data reveals that in 2011, the richest 10% of the adult population owned 72% of the country's household wealth.
72%.
While the entire bottom 50% owned just 2%. Furthermore, U.S. income inequality reached a record high in 2019, confirming that the country maintains some of the highest wealth and income inequality levels among its OECD peers.
And that severely complicates the narrative of a fully open, opportunity-driven society.
It does.
This high inequality necessarily connects directly to the social safety net and the welfare system provided by the government.
The U.S. welfare state is small compared to its high-income counterparts. The government redistributes significantly less income through taxation and social programs than most other high-income OECD countries. This is reflected in the persistent poverty indicators. 11.5% of the population lived in poverty in 2022, and there were roughly 771,480 homeless persons in 2024.
And the material also points out a significant policy gap.
A huge one. The U.S. lacks federal mandates for paid family leave or paid vacation. In fact, it is the only advanced economy that does not guarantee its workers paid vacation nationally.
Looking at science and technology, innovation appears to be a consistent, enduring national strength that feeds that economic power.
Historically, the U.S. pioneered fundamental industrial methods, like mass production using interchangeable parts and the assembly line system. Today, it still maintains the highest R&D expenditures of any country globally.
And it leads in specific advanced fields.
It's the acknowledged world leader in advanced fields like artificial intelligence technology. California's Silicon Valley is explicitly identified as the largest and foremost technology and innovation hub in the world.
That innovation drive is perhaps most dramatically symbolized by its historical role in spaceflight.
The U.S., through NASA's monumental Apollo 11 mission in 1969, remains the only country to have ever successfully landed humans on the moon. While NASA continues to lead major research initiatives, the sources highlight a major modern shift. The private sector now increasingly dominates the commercial spaceflight industry, led by powerful American companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin.
Turning to energy and transportation, the country's physical size and economic output mandate massive infrastructure and consumption.
The sheer consumption is notable. Despite having only about 4% of the world's population, the U.S. consumes approximately 16% of the world's energy.
And its energy mix.
While it embraces nuclear power, the U.S. is the world's largest producer of nuclear power, generating 30% of global nuclear electricity. It's still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, which account for about 84% of its consumption.
And the transportation infrastructure is built to connect this massive geography, heavily skewed toward the individual vehicle.
It has the longest road network globally, totaling 4 million miles. This focus on personal transport means 76% of U.S. commuters drive alone. In the air, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is confirmed as the world's busiest airport by passenger traffic.
And rail.
On the ground, the U.S. has the world's longest rail network, over 182,000 miles. But unlike many European systems, this network is primarily used for freight, is largely privately owned, and remains far less electrified. The government structure is foundational and unique. It is the world's oldest surviving federation, a presidential constitutional federal republic. This model of divided power has been highly influential globally, especially among nations that were achieving decolonization.
The system is structurally defined by the separation of powers across three co-equal branches, all designed for checks and balances.
The legislative branch is the bicameral Congress. First, you have the Senate, which guarantees equal representation to states, 2 members per state, serving staggered 6-year terms. Second, the House of Representatives, with 435 members elected every 2 years based on state population.
And Congress holds the ultimate power of the purse.
And the authority to declare war, and the power of impeachment, along with extensive oversight of the executive branch.
Then there is the executive branch, headed by the president.
The president functions as both head of state and head of government, serving as commander-in-chief and chief executive. They are elected via the Electoral College, an indirect election process where electors, technically chosen by state legislatures, cast the actual votes.
And the president has veto power.
Yes, though a 2/3 supermajority in both houses of Congress can override a veto. The president can also issue executive orders, but those are subject to judicial review.
And the judicial branch serves as the ultimate interpreter of laws.
The Supreme Court stands at the apex. It's composed of 9 members who are appointed for life by the president with Senate approval. Its primary function is judicial review interpreting laws and having the power to overturn unconstitutional legislation.
The scale of its operation is notable.
It is. It receives about 7,000 appeals petitions annually, but it only grants about 80 of those for a full decision, showing extreme selectivity in its jurisprudence.
Beyond the federal structure, the concept of sovereignty in the U.S. is uniquely shared across multiple layers of government.
The Constitution mandates that sovereign powers are shared between the national government, the 50 states, and the 574 federally recognized Native American tribes. Crucially, these tribes are legally defined as domestic dependent nations with inherent tribal sovereignty rights.
And there are the territories as well.
Separately, yes. The U.S. also asserts sovereignty over 5 major permanently inhabited territories, like Puerto Rico and Guam.
Politically, despite the Constitution being silent on the issue, a de facto two-party system dominates.
Since the mid-19th century, the Democratic and Republican parties have controlled the landscape, generally representing liberal and conservative ideologies, respectively. And as we noted earlier, modern political history is characterized by intense and rising political polarization between these two dominant groups.
Shifting to foreign relations, the U.S. is clearly positioned at the center of the global order, physically hosting the main global institutions.
The U.S. is a permanent member of the UN Security Council and has hosted the UN headquarters in New York City since 1952. It maintains a special relationship with the U.K. and strong diplomatic ties with NATO allies Japan, South Korea, and Israel.
The material also references a strategic geopolitical focus shift.
Yes, toward the Indo-Pacific region, through participation in the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue alongside Australia, Japan, and India.
The sources detail recent complexities in foreign policy regarding a specific major European conflict.
There was noted turbulence concerning the Russo-Ukrainian war. The sources indicate that following the 2024 presidential election, the president sought to negotiate an end to the conflict, which resulted in a pause in all military aid to Ukraine and an end to U.S. intelligence sharing in March 2025.
But that was restored.
It is confirmed, however, that both aid and intelligence sharing were eventually restored later that year, showing a dynamic, non-linear foreign policy approach.
Now for military power. The resources committed here are the highest in the world by a vast margin.
The military budget is globally unmatched. In 2024, the U.S. spent $997 billion on defense. That accounts for 37% of the total global military spending. It operates about 800 bases and facilities abroad and possesses the world's second-largest nuclear stockpile, only slightly behind Russia.
How does the source material suggest that massive expenditure influences U.S. foreign policy doctrine?
The data strongly implies a doctrine of continuous proactive engagement. The sources calculate that the U.S. has engaged in over 400 military interventions since its founding in 1776.
And the rate of intervention is accelerating.
That's the key. Over half of those interventions occurred between 1950 and 2019, with a full 25% taking place in the post-Cold War era alone. This demonstrates a pattern of accelerating interventionism following the establishment of global military and economic supremacy.
Finally, the law enforcement and criminal justice system presents perhaps the most fragmented and challenging aspect of domestic governance, connecting directly to those internal contradictions we keep returning to.
The structure itself is decentralized. There is no unified criminal justice system, but rather thousands of independent systems operating across federal, state, local, and tribal levels.
And the result of this system?
The profound result is shocking. The U.S. has the largest prison and jail population globally, with over 1.9 million people incarcerated in 2025. This equates to the sixth highest per capita incarceration rate in the world, 531 people per 100,000 inhabitants.
That incarceration rate, alongside the historical data on slavery and inequality, forces us to question the justice system's role in the national narrative. Furthermore, the sources link this directly to public health concerns regarding violence.
The analysis highlights that U.S. homicide rates are 7 times higher than in other high-income OECD countries. This alarming disparity, according to the data, is explicitly driven by a gun homicide rate that is 25 times higher than its high-income peers. The data shows the persistence of this profound and violent domestic security challenge operating right alongside the immense global power the nation wields.
To conclude our discussion, let's explore the massive cultural footprint of the United States. Its soft power, which is often the most visible aspect of the country globally. The core societal values detailed in the sources are rooted in that early history we discussed.
The values most often cited include individualism, personal autonomy, a strong work ethic, and competitiveness. However, the sources also highlight a massive component of voluntary altruism. Americans donated 1.44% of total GDP to charity in 2016, which is noted as the highest rate globally by a large margin.
The aspirational idea of the American dream, the belief in high social mobility, is a major cultural export and a powerful magnet for immigrants. But its accuracy seems profoundly debated, especially when you view it against the wealth inequality figures we just reviewed.
The sources confirm this debate. While the mainstream culture often portrays the U.S. as a classless society, scholars note significant, enduring differences between social classes that affect socialization, language, and cultural values. This link between high economic inequality and lower-than-perceived social mobility really complicates the global perception of the American dream.
In terms of expression, the First Amendment provides a legal framework that makes the U.S. unique globally.
The First Amendment grants the strongest free speech protections in the world. This protection extends even to highly controversial and offensive expressions, including flag desecration, hate speech, and blasphemy, which are curtailed in many other Western democracies.
And public support for this is high.
A 2016 poll confirmed that Americans were the most supportive of free expression and freedom of the press of any measured polity.
Cultural production is truly global in scope, often dominated by large commercial entities.
The mass media landscape is dominated by commercial broadcasters, NBC, CBS, ABC, FOX, though NPR provides a key public radio service. Critically, the U.S. culture industry is a massive global export engine. For instance, in the digital realm, the country is the world's second-largest video game market by revenue, and 58% of the world's game developers are based there, making it the undisputed top location for game development globally.
Tracing the literary influence is a journey through its history, starting with the influence of Enlightenment thought.
American literature was shaped early on by philosophers like John Locke, which you can see in the political writings of the Revolutionary period. Major movements include the 19th century American Renaissance, featuring seminal authors like Herman Melville, Emily Dickinson. The post-WWII era saw the rise of modernism and the anti-conformist Beat generation.
And the Harlem Renaissance,
which established a vital and independent literary tradition that celebrated Black culture and directly rebuked systemic inequality.
Cinema and music are perhaps the most recognizable engines of American soft power around the globe.
Hollywood is synonymous with the American film industry, and its major studios are the primary source of the world's most commercially successful movies, dominating global distribution. Musically, the U.S. is a cultural powerhouse, having developed enormously influential genres. Jazz, rock and roll, punk, and hip-hop all originated here and have reshaped global popular culture.
And the market size reflects that.
The U.S. retains the world's largest music market, measured at $15.9 billion in retail value in 2022.
Let's touch on cuisine. How did a distinctive American food culture emerge?
American cuisine is fundamentally an adaptation. It combines Native American foods like turkey, corn, and squash with the rich traditions brought by wave after wave of immigrant groups. Dishes that we now consider characteristic American fare, like hamburgers, apple pie, and American-style pizza, all derive from these diverse immigrant recipes.
And the scale of consumption is reflected in the business.
The restaurant industry is the country's second-largest private employer.
And finally, sports, which capture the nation's competitive, individualistic spirit.
American football is the most popular spectator sport. The National Football League boasts the highest average attendance of any sports league worldwide, culminating in the cultural spectacle of the Super Bowl. Baseball, while perhaps surpassed in popularity, is traditionally revered as the national sport.
And internationally.
In international competition, U.S. athletes have won the most total Olympic medals of any country, with 2,968. Furthermore, sports like basketball, volleyball, skateboarding, and snowboarding are all cited as American inventions that have gained significant global popularity. This structured analysis really reveals the United States as a true paradox of unprecedented scale and persistent fundamental contradiction. We had the data confirming the $30 trillion economy and the $997 billion defense budget, demonstrating unparalleled global scale. But that power is built upon deep historical and structural conflicts.
What the sources compel us to confront is the constant tension, the reconciliation of the 1776 Declaration of Independence, founded on universal rights, with the concurrent, immediate, and systemic enslavement of Africans in all 13 colonies and the violent policies of Indian removal and genocide that defined 19th century expansion. This tension never truly disappears.
And in the modern context, we see these contradictions manifesting acutely. The nation remains a global leader in technological innovation, higher education, and cultural soft power, yet simultaneously faces severe domestic challenges that place it outside the norms of its high-income peers.
Things like extreme wealth inequality.
An absence of federally mandated paid leave, the world's largest prison population, and homicide rates driven by guns that are 25 times higher than other wealthy nations.
So what does this all mean for you? We are left with a final, provocative question to consider. How does the nation's foundational belief in Enlightenment values in liberty, equality, and popular sovereignty continue to clash with the latest statistics detailing record income inequality and an astonishingly high incarceration rate? That enduring tension between the aspirational founding ideals and the harsh statistical realities of the present day is what truly defines the American journey moving forward.
We encourage you to explore the original source material on all of these complex topics further on your own.
Thanks for listening.